We have created a field within our current economic system that is a sort of like an as-if sustainability field, and that's called ESG. You have the outside-in perspective of how are you affected as an organization by the context around you. And there's the inside-out perspective of how are we affecting the context around us. And that is what is called double materiality, or as the EU calls it, impact materiality and financial materiality. Although I find those words meaningless because
Ralph, I'm very excited to have you on the Core Impact podcast. And to be honest with you, having this conversation with you is humbling me, because when I know about your work and many topics that you are talking about, especially in a business that I used to consider myself someone who is specialized at least in sustainability, I got to know how many things I don't know about. And even when I was searching about your work, there were still things that I didn't really grasp. So it's here an opportunity for me also to humble myself again and to dive deep into these topics, and feel free to also dive deep as much as you want. But before, I want to start with the first question, that you've been leading projects, training, and writing about sustainability for over 35 years. What is your inner motivation, and why do you do this?
it's a good question to start with. I think first and foremost, when I started, it was the fascination of the paradigm called sustainability or sustainable development, which started for me in 1987 with the Brundtland report. So that's 39 years ago that I really first, got excited about, what is the vision of the world and what can we as humans on this one planet, on this spaceship Earth, achieve together. And I wanted to also understand how economics and economic systems work, as I had already decided that I would study economics at that time. And when I started that in 1988, with the fresh Brundtland report release in the back of my mind, I was gifted by the fact that if you wanted to study economics, you needed to study, and I did that in Germany, in Nuremberg, you had to study microeconomics and macroeconomics at the same time, or at least have some courses about macroeconomics, which you needed to see in. And what became clear to me was what I, until today, call the micro-macro link, also within sustainability, so that you can only know if you are sustainable if you really know what we now call thresholds and allocations, based on, if you use Kate Raworth's donut language, the environmental boundaries and the social ceilings, so to say. So how would you know that you are sustainable? So none of that was an economic theory, of course, because the earth was abundant, and everything could go on like it is forever, and we could grow forever, and we would all be rational human beings and would make good decisions, and greed is good, and all of those things that you learn when you study economics, at least at that time. So my fascination has always been to see how sustainable development fits into economic theory, or how economic theory needs to adapt to fit sustainability. It's maybe the better way to say that. And then with the years, it was really the idea that sunlight is the best disinfectant. So if we are transparent about what we do and how we do it, and align with the one Earth boundaries, so to say, and the social ceilings, then we can all learn together, be transparent about how sustainable we are, and then, get better altogether. So that was the basic fascination there. That started a journey for me, and it's an ongoing journey still today, because we're just, out of many reasons, seem to not be willing to deliver on that promise. And so there is still a lot of work to do, and things have changed over time, and priorities for me have changed over time, and for the organizations I worked for and now also co-founded, priorities have changed over time. So that is why I'm still on the case, so to say, and the excitement has never stopped. Uh,
Mm,
just the priorities have changed, and the insight into what's working and what's not working have changed.
mm. And
And maybe I should add, I'm a father. I'm actually a grandfather,
mm,
and sustainability is really the translation of what is called intergenerational equity. The Brundtland report already in 1987 was saying, don't do anything in your generation that would harm future generations to have the same opportunities as your own generation. And the fact is that we're doing that every second of our life.
mm,
We're burdening future generations for our own comfort. And that is why I just can't say I'm finished.
mm,
And I'd never be finished in my lifetime. But the excitement and the responsibility that I have from knowing, yeah, with knowing comes responsibility, um, makes me continue to work in that field.
mm. Ralph, since you talked about change, notice that when I talk to leaders, they always tell me every now and then they discovered something new. They challenge themselves. They are looking at things differently more and more, like by time. So what is the thing that maybe changed in your perspective on sustainability in the last 6 to 12 months?
In the last 6 to 12 months, I would rather stretch it a little bit and say in the last 2 to 3 years,
Mm,
because that is really where everything that I now do stems from. And I think it is the insight after, let's say, at that time, more than 30 years in the field, that I've been hunting behind an ideal that's not going to happen in the current economic system.
mm,
So the idea that with sunlight is the best disinfectant, with more transparency, and with all the ratings, rankings, indices, reporting standards, quality standards, and so on, that we would achieve anything for sustainability. The reality shows is we don't.
mm,
We have created a field within our current economic system that is an sort of like an as if sustainability field. And that's called ESG.
mm,
And with that, and having made offers how to overcome that as if sustainability that's happening everywhere, more or less, and that's sort of like the only game in town, as it seems. Um, I've come to the conclusion that certain constituencies are not able to change if the economic system doesn't change first. And in order to the economic system to change first, and that's quite radical what I'm saying here, but I think it is not radical anymore because it's already happening.
mm,
The existing system needs to collapse. And we're right in the middle of the culmination of various factors that lead to that collapse. Some call it a polycrisis. Others actually already call it a meta-crisis,
mm,
meaning that polycrisis still gave you the idea that single solutions might be possible for single topics. That is over. That time is gone. So you can rightly say it is not a poly crisis with single topics, but a meta crisis with interrelated topics that just simply have no single solutions. And that's something that Jonah Macy was already saying. She was saying in our predicament that we're living in, there are no solutions. There are only potential interventions.
mm,
But that needs system change, and not certain topics in an existing system to be somehow adapted. That's gone. And at our 3.0, the organization that I lead, we've been working with this idea of what we called collapse avoidance for round about the first year of our existence. And we're now in the second decade of our existence, in the second to third year of that. And we have given up on collapse avoidance. And the question that you then ask yourself is, what are you going to do then? And we have shifted towards what we call collapse resilience and collapse resilience strategies.
Mm.
And with that comes the insight that no single corporation will ever be sustainable in the existing economic system design. No government is able to give us the sort of the circumstances for organizations to be sustainable. No big NGO, especially those that are more and more co-opted by the corporate field for funding reasons, will be able to give us that. And that leads to that meta crisis that I was already talking about. And the big shift that really happened then for us was, okay, if the corporation, if the government, if the NGO is not our core clientele, what is it then? And what's the unit of measurement that we want to work on in order to develop those collapse resilience strategies? And that brought us to bioregionalism, which is or has been the source code of life of humans on this planet since we exist. It is just that for the last 400 or 500 years, it has been bulldozered over by our economic system design, by the idea that greed is good, by globalization, by industrialization. That's sort of killing all of these basics and has let us forget all the indigenous wisdom that has already been here. As I said, it's all been pushed under the carpet for the wealth of a small group of industrialists, ITers, billionaires, where in the end everybody here on this planet is suffering from.
Mm.
So that's the biggest change that has happened in the last 2 to 3 years.
Mm. Ralph, you just said something that I heard you also saying before. You said the business case for sustainability was more important than the sustainability case for business. This is in the same direction what you're talking about now. And I would like to give mention some statements that you said in the past, and you can expand on them as much as you want if you like.
Okay.
So maybe we can a bit reflect on this statement a bit.
Yeah, it's one of those things that stems from the idea that there is no sustainable business in an unsustainable economic system. That's a basic realization. And I've seen the unwillingness of core constituencies to change the current economic system. And instead, every organization is sort of like slaverishly hunting after the idea, behind the idea of, sustainability only works if there is a return on investment, an ROI for sustainability. And boards, as unknowing about sustainability as they are still, would always ask for a business case. So what's the business case for sustainability? And all of these poor chief sustainability officers need to somehow invent something after low-hanging fruit have been harvested. That time is gone. So where's the ROI of sustainability? And from my perspective, it was, for a longer time, it was things like, we can green our supply chain, and we can reduce our risk to being called greenwashed, or we would be part of certain ratings and indices and rankings, and we would score high, and our reputation would grow from that. So those were sort of the business cases for sustainability, and every now and then there might still be a low-hanging fruit to harvest that they haven't harvested before. But that's sort of absolutely not the point of sustainability. It's not sustainability. It is ESG progress management, so to say. And that is why I'm saying, and when I hear chief sustainability officers or anybody in sustainability expanding about the ROI of sustainability, my answer would always be that is totally irrelevant. There is no business case for sustainability. There is only a sustainability case for business. And guys, you will find out, because the meta crisis will kick you in the butt. And we're seeing that, now there's a mega typhoon in the West Pacific with 300 and more kilometers of wind, threatening island groups where there are 50, 60,000 people living on them. So we'll see more of that. And what is something that is totally underestimated is the correlation between what's happening on climate change on the one side, where we're killing the buffer capacity of planet Earth as it is for 50 years, by the way, and we're reaching the end of this. On the other hand, we're destroying biodiversity, which has added to the buffer. So we're actually eating up the buffer capacity from both sides. And then also we're thinking that resources that we need, for example, for renewable energy means like wind and solar and geothermal and so on, that these resources would be available at scale, scope, and pace necessary. Well, we know from UNEP, we know from the Club of Rome, that that's not the case. We are running out of these metals and minerals between 2035 and 2050. So whenever there are these extrapolations of what do we have to reach by 2050, by 2070, by 2100, I find them completely useless, because they're so out of context and are just basically created from past measures. So I really have my doubts that they have any use in making these assumptions. Yeah. So with that regard, I'm highly critical of the sustainability field as they present themselves, and should I say bullshit that they are providing us with. I just think, how can you be so out of context making these statements? And when I hear companies and read sustainability reports that tell me, oh, last year we've become a bit more sustainable, that's utter nonsense. There is no bit more sustainable. There's either you became less degenerative, or you have a regenerative performance, which allows you to say that you are sustainable. But, being less degenerative and then saying we became a bit more sustainable is just greenwashing. So it's these things that really annoy me, because the field, I think, knows better. They're just not showing it. And they're winning because they're in the treadmill of the existing system. And whoever is the superior would put a question mark behind all of that.
While you are listening to the Core Impact podcast, please take a moment to pause and share with me. How do you feel? Are you enjoying the conversation, feeling inspired, or something else? I would love to know your feelings in the comments. There are other statements that I would like to reflect on with you, one after the other. But before, I heard from you in different times, different things you mentioned, but they are around that you are in peace with what's happening, that you talked about resilience, that you also, one time I remember you said, I'm not an unhappy person, I'm happy, like also coming back to this inner peace, let's say. How can you have this balance between tackling all these global issues and fundamental crises that we are having in the world, at the same time being in peace within yourself?
Well, sometimes you have these depressive moments, of course, and you're frustrated that there is not more progress. But on the other hand, the only thing that's then relevant is, what do you do with this? And I think all of us in the sustainability field who are honest and accepting what sustainable development was meant to be, and that was right from the start a complete change of our economic system design. And it's that didn't happen. And so people like me, but many others as well, we were going sort of like through a mourning process. And it starts with, for many people, they're still in denial about that reality of an ongoing collapse since the 1970s. I knew that from at least 1990 or so,
Mm.
that the numbers that the Club of Rome, with their World One model, extrapolated, were actually quite accurate. And the world has nothing better to do than to ridicule it. So being collapse aware is, I think, the first part of that mourning story, and then also becoming collapse acknowledging, I think, is necessary to go through in order to then really go through that inner process of, well, you can mourn forever or you can do something.
Mm.
That's what Jonah Macy calls active hope, and then really becoming active on the realization of your journey. And that is what, that's where you see a crack of light and where you think, well, from now on, I can do something with this. And that is what really also led us to change our strategy at R3.0,
Mm.
is, and led to the work that we're doing these days. And privately, it has also changed a couple of things. So, we're living in a house that is too big for us.
Mm.
Out of the house. We're going to sell it.
Mm.
We will live much smaller. And as I'm reaching the age of 60 in about a month, um, and not knowing how long the geopolitical situation will allow us to do the things that we still want to do, we have gone on a journey. We call them bioregional nomads on the road. So we bought a camper, and we're traveling in the different bioregions of Europe and
Mm.
trying to weave them together, trying to really build coherence between the approaches, trying to build weaving in and between those bioregions. Because bioregionalism that starts like from the ground off is often unconnected to other initiatives, and there are many other initiatives. So how can we make those visible and by that also stronger? And that is what we do through our Bioregional Nomads on the Road tour. We're not on the tour all the time. You see me at home right now, but we're on the road quite often now and have done this for a year now, only, let's say, in the Netherlands and in Germany for now. But that had to do with the fact that we had an old dog where we needed to respect the end of her lifetime. And she passed away exactly 3 weeks ago. Today would be
Mm.
12th birthday. And now we can do the bigger tours. So the first tour that we're going to do from mid-May to end of June is going to be through Denmark, Sweden, and Norway. Because there's a lot already happening there as well on bioregionalism and the identity of the people with the nature is of a different kind. And I've been there before, but not with that focus. And it has always impressed me. Um, how do you live actually really in harmony
Mm.
with nature and respect the idea that we only have this one planet, and growth is not an ideal, and maybe I should clarify what I'm talking about is monetary growth, because that's what the whole world is focused on.
Mm.
I still think there is growth possible, growth in natural capital, nature capital, social capital, relationship capital, human capital. But the aim should not be to build financial capital on the back of these other capitals, because that's what the current system currently does, constantly does. So that is one of the things that really have also changed for us as a family and for my wife and I to be on these trips and to learn and put our hands into the mud and be there on the ground and learn from the people who are doing the work in order to let others learn from that work. And that is also one of the pillars of our work at R3.0, the coherence building and building kin, so to say, and creating that coherent picture that there is a world that is already running in parallel to the existing system. That's the bioregion world. And also more and more making people understand that certain paradigms that we are still building our economic system on are just highly questionable. So the idea of nation states and their boundaries, which are built on artificial reason or power structures, not on how Gaia would organize life on this planet. Or the idea that you can only manage what you own is so contradictory to the idea of the commons. And the idea that financial capital only has to deliver alpha while it destroys the capabilities of creating alpha is so weird that we learn from those trips. We learn about how do you map bioregions, what is the importance of history in bioregions, what's the indigenous part in these bioregions, how they dependent from other bioregions these days, and by that just doing our bit to creating a visible sort of counter system to the exploitative system that we have right now.
There's so many points that I would like to uh, talk about, like one after the other that you mentioned, and one of them is biorealism. To be honest, I didn't know what is it before I started to get to know about you. But before this, there is one thing also that you mentioned, and I'm curious how people perceive it and what do they say when you talk about, for example, the awareness of why do we have the national boundaries? What kind of discussions do you have when you talk about it with others?
Well, it depends on who you talk to.
Mm,
There are many people that from their own gut would say, what you say is so logic,
mm,
completely understand it. The only problem that I have is how can I activate this in my own surrounding, in my own community, make other people understand it, things like that. And then you have those people who are, let's say, the opportunistic ones that say, yeah, you have a point here and there. How can we combine things in a way that we can sort of smoothly somehow tweak around it and still make it a bit better? That's where I'm saying goodbye. Not interested.
mm,
Um, and then there are the cynics that would say, oh, your ideas are totally naive. It's never going
mm,
to happen. Our system, no way, no way. This is a dream world that you're creating here. You should be a little bit more realistic and, things like that. So you have all that. And last but not least, you have already the people, and of course, I'm talking to many of these people that are already doing it.
mm,
So you have that whole spectrum of reactions that you get. And very often, especially when you talk to people in public authorities or in municipalities, the first question that you get, what's your mandate? And I'm saying, do I need a mandate? Yeah, because I have a mandate. I said, yeah, no, I don't have a mandate. I don't need a mandate. I'm talking to you because I think I have the better argument. And that sometimes works and sometimes not.
mm.
And that's where you see that even people in municipalities are very often in their own treadmills. They have the same hierarchic structures than the corporate. They have the same um, need to deliver. Otherwise, they might not get a bonus, or they might not climb up a ladder higher, higher on the ladder, or things like that. All of these artificial, self-made human obstacles are still in play, and that is what guides them, not what's really necessary.
Hmm. Ralph, if someone is listening to us and doesn't know what biorealism is, would you like to explain it in a simple way? And by the way, I just want to tell you that you shared one video. It made me cry, to be honest.
The one from yesterday.
Yes.
Yeah. And it is so simple, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is so simple. Yeah. So what's a bioregion? Well, first of all, there's the Planet Drum Foundation, and Peter Burke, who was founding the Planet Drum Foundation, gave a sort of definition. It said it's a geological structure of place that is mostly defined by a watershed. Because without water, there's nothing. There's
Mm.
nothing. We can't live without water. And of course, we can't live without air, but water, in order to grow, nature is just absolutely necessary. So if you look at the planet and you just slice and dice it by the watersheds, you come up with a map of bioregions. At the same time, these spaces or geological structures with their watersheds are also cultural areas. So, for example, I am living in the rivers of the North Sea bioregion. And the rivers of the North Sea, so those that end in the North Sea, are running through 5, 6, or 7 different countries
Mm.
with very different languages, with very, very different cultures, going back to the nomadic age and going back to the Roman Empire and Germanic tribes and all of that. So these cultures are created through or climate the people lived in there, the belongings, the assets that were there, and the cultures that they delivered, music, arts, way of collaborating, how villages are structured, and things like that. So there's a quite good global mapping of bioregions already in existence. And that, if you can then compare that to how national boundaries are created, they just cut right through these bioregions in a non-logic way, apart from that some humans were more powerful than other humans and
Mm.
created these boundaries. That's the only reason why. So that is how you define a bioregion. And what we're seeing is that there are hundreds of bioregions on this planet, and there are hundreds of already what we call bioregional learning centers. And that is actually the basic organizational level that we're starting to work with as R3.0. But what you need to realize that each of these bioregional learning centers are already weaving in their own bioregions, because there are many projects, farms, water resilience, many different sorts of produce that are grown there in permacultural aspects, cultivating the soil, taking back soil to give it back to nature. There are many projects already happening in all these bioregions, and they all play a role, but very often they don't know about each other. And that is where bioregional learning centers can actually play a role. And we know that there are hundreds of them around the world, and we work with them.
Mm.
We want to make them learn from each other, not only from the geological differences that they have. Each bioregion is unique, but also from the cultural differences, and especially also the indigenous knowledge that was created over thousands of years in these bioregions, and to really bring that back to the front. And therefore, except from weaving on coherence building, which is one of our strategic pillars, we work on bioregional knowledge commons. So how can we capture and make that knowledge alive for everybody on this planet, independent where they are, and totally unfenced, with complete data sovereignty, so that cannot be manipulated. or shut down by somebody. And so, yeah, that's a second pillar of our work. And maybe I'll just mention the other two. We also work in bioregional self-governance. So if the realization is that politics doesn't work anymore,
Mm,
we've seen that. What's the sort of governance that is necessary in and between bioregions to actually cultivate dialogue and interaction with each other? And then the question of bioregional funding ecosystems. So how do you create the necessary funding for the work that is necessary? So those are the sort of four pillars that we're working on. And they all add to what we would call collapse resilience. Having said that, it means that it might be that not all bioregions of this planet will survive the meta crisis.
mm,
So, migration strategies are necessary as well. And that's a big point for bioregions to say, how do we deal with the coming migration crisis? Or, sort of, what are we going to do with these people? And how can we feed them? How can we get them to work? How can we let them work on the commons with us? And as many as there are.
mm.
And we know that by 2050, around about 1 billion people
Yes.
will be on the move. And they will strive to come to the bioregions that are prosperous.
Mm. I think this is one of the most underestimated issues that most people I talk to are unaware of, and they underestimate like how big it is to say 1 billion by 2050. And sometimes we look at the future as something very far away from us, but if you think about our life, as you say, our children's life and so on, then it's something that's gonna happen. Like in the end, we're gonna live it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. The future is now,
Yeah.
and we need to act, today. Well,
Mm,
yesterday, maybe 50 years ago, when the Limits to Growth report came out in 1972. Um, and yeah, they were already predicting all the right things. So
mm,
we had 50 years, more than 50 years to deal with it. And one of our steering board members, Gaia Harrington, just did a study a couple of years ago on how correct these assumptions were, and she said they're to the point. Yeah, we're living exactly on those curves that were already predicted in 1972. Amazing, amazing. You remember how much computer capabilities there were, yeah, with the first world model. Now I think we're really working with Word 7 or so, the seventh edition of that. So yeah, it's amazing.
mm. Ralph, there are also other statements that I'm curious to see, like understand from you. What did you mean by them that I'd like to mention? I'm not going to be able to mention all of them, but I'm going to pick now. It was very interesting for me to understand, if I understood correctly. You said double materiality concept, which is inside out, which is impact materiality, and outside in, which is called also financial materiality. This whole concept is ridiculous, as I understood. Why?
Well, I'm coming back to what I said in the beginning when I talked about thresholds and allocations.
Mm,
When do you know that any performance is not only material, but also sustainable?
mm,
So, and I can go back to 2006 when I was still working for the Global Reporting Initiative. And, sunlight is the best disinfectant. GRI was the only game in town. I was responsible for the principles work stream for G2 and G3, so in 2002 and 2006. And when you look back at the definitions of what we call sustainability context, then you can already read something that we at ArcPeter are calling triple materiality. So first of all, yes, you have the outside in perspective of how are you affected as an organization by the context around you. Then there's the inside out perspective of how are we affecting the context around us. And that is what is called double materiality, or as the EU calls it, impact materiality and financial materiality. Although I find those words meaningless, because in the end, you want to know not what is destroying something to be material, but what is constructive and regenerating, and how that materiality really becomes visible. And that is when you add sustainability context. The G2 and the G3, you can read the definitions are crystal clear around that, because it says in order to call something sustainable, you need to put it into the context of the thresholds, the available capacity, and the allocation, your capacity of that available capacity, in order to compare your own performance against that. Only if you do that, you can make a statement about something being sustainable.
Mm.
And if in any case you are below that, it is per se material. So I would say in most of the areas that companies report on, they are not sustainable, and therefore it is material. But you only know that when you compare your own performance against the thresholds and allocations. And the donut economic model was actually sort of demanding that with the environmental ceilings and social floors, because you have environmental topics and you have social topics and governance as well. But I would subsume them under there as well. And the GRI was asking for set your performance into context. And that is what companies didn't want to do. Because in the end, if you do that, what you get is your level of unsustainability.
Mm.
That's not nice
Mm.
in marketing terms.
Mm.
That's not nice in building your reputation or something like that. So corporations weren't interested. I have to say that in the beginning, it was still more of a data and IT problem to how do I get to that thresholds and allocations information. But I would say at least from 2015 onwards, it would have been easy to do that.
Mm.
And all of the standards, the GRI, the ESRS, the ISSB, they are denying that responsibility to give us what we call denominator indicators. So if you look at sustainability as an indicator with a nominator and a denominator, the performance is on the nominator. And what companies are doing is that they compare the performance of 1 year to the performance of the last year, or the performance of the last 5 years, or an industry average. But it always stays on the nominator side. That's ESG.
Mm.
But if you compare that to thresholds and allocations information on the denominator side, then you can make a statement.
Mm.
Then you can say, here's a performance that is less degenerative or regenerative, and by that then sustainable, because you are in the inner part of the donut, so to say.
Mm. Mm.
Only then it is relevant, or should I say material. And in that sense, everything an organization does that does not adhere to that, then it's material.
Mm.
And double materiality just don't give you that. It doesn't give you that. It just gives you an indication that something might not be sustainable, or it gives you, it puts different contexts into it. For example, we discussed it with our stakeholders, and they think it's material. But how would stakeholders know without sustainability context? And that was the brilliance of the GRI guidelines at that time. And we really thought that we crack a deal there, where we said, when we looked at the reporting content principles, it started with sustainability context, then materiality, then stakeholder inclusiveness, and then completeness. And those four together would give you a very clear picture about how sustainable an organization is.
Mm.
companies did is that they denied the sustainability context principle and then pushed everything in between materiality and stakeholder inclusiveness. And that defined what they thought was material, because their stakeholder thought something was material. But what happened in those stakeholder dialogues, and I facilitated many of them until I stopped because I found it ridiculous to do, was just simply that, for example, big NGOs, they sent a young person from their staff and said, hammer on that one topic. You have to hammer on the topic. Yeah, I say, you have to say this is material, because that's what we as NGOs stand for.
Hmm.
Well, they went there, hammered on that topic, so it became material. And the company said, okay, well, then then we'll report on that. But what is it that they reported? Just ESG progress. Nothing about sustainability. So I am making a statement here where I say, I haven't hardly seen any sustainability report yet. I
Hmm.
haven't seen any sustainability rating or index yet, because they're all based on ESG progress. And bullshit in creates bullshit out. It might be useful for managing certain topics. I'm not denying that. But when I'm going to a rating agency and they have their, they support green funds or whatever, I said, okay, so when do you know that your green fund is green? They wouldn't know.
Hmm.
They said, well, it's all these little steps in the right direction. I said, that's the problem. It's not good enough. It doesn't give you minimally what you need to achieve by a certain amount of time. And therefore, we as R3.0 work together with the United Nations on the UN SDPI indicators, because they were doing exactly what all of these standards were denying,
Hmm.
adding the denominator to ESG progress.
Hmm.
We had success with that. There are around 300 people who went through that training, but there's hardly anybody who is publishing on it.
Hmm.
And there, I think it's still the boards that are denying. It's still the inner processes that do not allow this knowledge to come out. Because, as I said, it would very clearly show the level of unsustainability of these organizations.
Hmm.
And none of them wants to do that. Well, with one exception, Patagonia
Hmm.
recently came out with a report where they said, nothing that we do is sustainable. And that's Patagonia. That says something.
Hmm.
I hope that was clear.
Yeah, and there is the same direction also. You reminded me when you talk about the sustainability statement. You said that regulations like CSRD and triple D are becoming a statement of nothingness. And also that you mentioned around like over 90%, like between 92 to 94% of companies are exempted from reporting now. So the question here is, what does that mean for trust in this whole regulation, sustainability regulation, the whole system? And also, what does it mean for professionals who either shifted to this field and then they were led off, they had to go back to other fields or rediscover themselves?
Well, let's first be very clear. The sustainability, the ESG progress field, I have to say,
Mm.
was promised that there would be decent reporting standards that the majority of relevant organizations needed to report on. And that got completely watered down by the European Commission due to the pressures from the outside world, due to the lobbyism of industry associations, due to different proportions in the EU Parliament with more right-wing extremists and more conservatives who all didn't want this because, oh, the markets will do it and we need to make money and we need to grow and now we're in a war and all of those conditions that they created because of 50 years of denial. Yeah, we knew 50 years ago where this would be going. And now we get exactly the collapsology playbook 101. It's the retraction from earlier commitments. Companies retract their climate targets. Governments retract regulations. The European Parliament betrayed the sustainability community. So that is what I've seen. And that is, if only a couple % of companies need to report, what does that give us? In addition to what they need to report is just ESG progress, not sustainability. So what does that mean? And that is where I said, for me, that's a statement of nothingness, because it's so little information, so irrelevant for managing a field. It's ridiculous. And that's why I made that statement.
Oh
yeah, you were asking, what does it mean for the people?
Yes.
Um,
And maybe also I can combine it with another question. It's also the same direction, that where do you see the career opportunities in sustainability? How it will develop? Will it increase or decrease?
Well, there is a counter offer, and that's bioregionalism.
Okay.
It's becoming active in your own bioregion, either in projects or in the creation of bioregional learning centers. There is now a strategy. We work together with the Design School for Regenerating Earth, and they call it a dandelion strategy. They want to create 1,000 bioregional learning centers in the next 10 years. Bioregional learning center work is hard work. It needs to be funded, of course, and we need to find the funding structures, how we can finance bioregional learning centers, but that needs expertise. And I think everybody who has a serious, well-meant sustainability background can find work there or create those things. In my own career, every position that I have or had in the past, I created myself.
That's very inspiring. Yes.
You need to, don't wait for anybody else to do it for you. It's not going to work. If you believe in this, as I did when I started with Siemens first, where there was no chief sustainability officer function at that time, when I started at GRI, which didn't exist before, when I started to work for Deloitte, and I became sort of the EMEA manager for sustainability and innovation, a position that didn't exist before. And then when I funded our 3.0, a weird organization that nobody thought it's necessary and nobody thought it's ever going to be successful. I always created it myself. So if you believe in any of what I'm saying and the idea of bioregionalism, the need for bioregional learning centers to weave the activities and to build knowledge commons and to create dialoguing structures and all of that, yes, it would need millions of sustainability experts to do that. So here's your offer. Just go out and find it or found it.
I had goosebumps when you were talking.
Good. Very good. Because I think the opportunity is there. The only thing is, don't wait for anybody to come to you. That's active hope. You need to create it. And that just adds to your own authenticity, to your own reputation, and to be persistent and, go through the bumps of the road, but also reach the mountains of it. Reach the mountaintop. So after 35 years, maybe another tip or one of the tips, don't be guided by the idea of, I have to make so much income. Don't be guided by that. My experience has always been, if you stand for something, if you create something, if you are persistent, if you are authentic, the money will come because you will attract it. And then just on a very personal basis, just find out what you can do all the small things that you can do. For example, I'm living here in the northern part of the Netherlands, a lot of farms around me. And of course, we have normal infrastructure with supermarkets and all of that. Supermarkets are temples of sin. Each supermarket has a huge footprint,
mm,
has logistical value chains, and creates waste of all the things that they don't sell. Sometimes they give it to a food bank or so, but there's still too much waste created. Look around you. You know, I can say in the vicinity of maybe 2 square kilometers around me, I have a vineyard, I have a dairy farmer, I have a meat farmer, I have fruit and vegetable farmers. The basic needs are produced in 2 square kilometers vicinity of me. And, you know, just think about how many people do you talk to when you go to a supermarket? Maybe only the person at the cash
mm,
machine. When you go to all these farms, you create dialogues.
mm,
You tell them what motivated you to buy at the farm.
mm,
You tell them about the other farms that you're buying stuff from. You create um, how to say, connections.
mm,
I know all of these farmers around me. They know me.
mm,
And that is what creates community. And what that creates, you know, you being known in your community as somebody who weaves the connection.
mm,
That's the first very private step that you can do. And by the way, it's healthy because we do it by bike.
mm,
So we tour around, very healthy, not with a car to the supermarket. It's just one example. And by the way, I have a grandkid that learns from all that.
mm,
We're also growing some of our own vegetable here in our own garden. We do it together with them. So it's a million little things,
yeah,
and they all make a difference.
mm,
Maybe only first for you, but later on with others. And
mm,
that's how community building works.
mm, mm. It all starts with one person, everything.
Everything starts with one person.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
I'm gonna ask you a question from previous guest. So
Okay.
it was Dr. Stefan Brunhuber, and his question, he chose this question with like on purpose. It's a bit for me it's tricky, but I will ask it anyway. What is the common ground between the US petrodollar system and Chinese Belt and Road Initiative from a monetary perspective?
Not directly my area of expertise, I have to say. But given the circumstances that we're in right now, I think there are connections.
Mm,
Um, for example, what we see right now in this war with Iran and the closing of the Strait of Hormuz, you very clearly see that these are structures where the Chinese infrastructure have been hit. And with not being able to deliver raw fossil fuels to countries like India, China, and also Japan, the world becomes more dependent on the US oil and gas production.
mm,
Well, that's going to bring lots of dollars to the US administration. I think that's partially one of the reasons why the Strait of Hormuz is still closed, or the Americans are now closing it to a certain degree. And it's these sort of warfare tactics that create a direct correlation between the US petrol system and the Chinese. So yeah, it's all power over strategies.
mm.
For the
Now,
for the wealth,
mm,
a couple of billionaires and the family Trump.
mm. Now
don't
it's
know
your
if this answered the question at all, but at least I tried.
yeah. For me, I don't know. It's very interesting, inspiring for me, like what guests are reflecting on whether new ones will answer. So now it's your turn. What is the question that you would like me to ask future guests?
I think it's just one question.
Mm,
What is holding you back to help create an economic system that is allowing all life on planet Earth to prosper?
mm.
What holds you back?
I'll do this. Ralph, I'm very grateful for this conversation with you. And before I end the podcast, I will ask you a very general question. Is there anything important that you think is like we could have talked about? You like to mention even in short?
Anything that I like to mention? Anything. um, you know, I live this struggle on a daily basis, and that also has to do with the last question that I have. How can I best convince people of the better argument and take them out of their stereotypes?
Mm,
Because these are so harsh and so strong that all levels of realism seem to be not working. You see that with the MAGA clowns and with many, many other cults. And I think that we have an economic system that more and more creates cults instead of decent people. And that is something that I really worry about because it takes them out of the ability or the capability to have a proper discussion or conversation.
mm,
You're clearly put into some sort of a box, not fitting to their code, and that kills it, so to say. And I worry because these people at a certain moment in our collapse will be prey. And that makes me really sad because I think still off today, they have the biggest of all opportunities, creating a bioregional life. So yeah, like with that farmer that we watched in the video,
mm,
maybe we can put the link of that video underneath your podcast. Um, it all isn't so difficult if we all stick together
mm,
in these communities. And we can feed 8 billion people, no problem. It is just the willingness to do so
mm,
and to just
mm,
let go of certain power structures in
mm,
farming and agriculture and food supply that is slaverishly dependent on fossil fuel. You know, if you already hear that, oh, now we have lesser and lesser fertilizer, which are all fossil fuel based, it will ruin our food production. Well, really? You know, that farmer didn't use any fertilizers.
mm,
He was looking at the land, the geology of the land, and how to preserve it and live off the produce of that land in a very sustainable way. And he gives away what he has and gets things from others. And that's all they need.
mm. Yeah, it could be that simple.
It could be that simple. Well, and maybe, yes, there's still electricity that's needed and there's still internet needed and phones and stuff like that. But these things could be done differently. So
Mm,
I'm just thinking stepping a step or two steps back and backcasting from an ideal and then develop what you
mm,
really want to stand for as a person.
mm,
I think that's
mm,
it.
mm. Thank you very much, Ralph. I think if I wanted to ask you all the questions that I have here with the follow-up questions that came to my mind, we will have spent at least 3 hours, I think. But I'm really grateful for the conversation with you,
Well,
all the insights.
we can continue at a later day.
Yeah, that would be great.
Maybe a
Yeah,
second
yeah,
iteration, and maybe your listeners have questions on to me as well.
yeah.
So we can do an update maybe in a half year or so if you want.
Okay, perfect. We do this then. Thank you very much. I wish you all the best, Ralph.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Congratulations for listening until the end. You are in the top 25% of listeners. Studies show that we forget up to 70% of what we hear within 24 hours. But when we repeat an insight by sharing it with someone, commenting, or journaling it, it moves into long-term memory. So now tell me, what are your 1 to 3 takeaways you're keeping from this conversation? Enjoy every moment. Until next time.